Siamo arrivati alla fine, che peraltro è solo un nuovo inizio. E se riesco a ottenere un po' di silenzio, presenterei il nostro ultimo ospite, che è la professoressa Lise Coyne, che appartiene alla Harvard Medical School e dirige anche il McLean Institute per lo studio degli OCD nei bambini e negli adolescenti. Ed è un grosso piacere per noi averla qui oggi e anche domani, perché farà un seminario appunto domani a dove siamo? Al nuovo hotel, quello vicino a Niguarda. Lascio la parola a Anna Prevedini, che voleva dire lei due parole conclusive prima di lasciare il posto alla professoressa Coyne. Quindi, cara Anna, ti cedo il microfono.
Grazie. Scusate, leggerò, ma a questo punto non sono veramente in grado di fare altro. Allora, siamo alla fine di questo evento che nell'intenzione di chi lo ha organizzato sicuramente, ma ne sono sicura anche di coloro che hanno partecipato come relatori e come editori, vuole essere solo un inizio, come ha appena detto il professore, e vorrei dedicare qualche importante minuto a ringraziare chi ha reso possibile questo inizio così ricco. Ho avuto il piacere di essere ringraziata in apertura, ma ovviamente sono solo chi ha tagliato il traguardo in una staffetta a molti partecipanti e, tanto per essere chiara, tenere le fila per me è stato molto più un onore e un'opportunità che una fatica. Alcuni maestri cruciali per la mia vita affermano a voce e con le loro azioni quanto la comunità, una comunità, sia non tanto importante ma necessaria per progredire e per farlo con costanza. Uno di questi maestri, miei maestri, il monaco buddista Thich Nhat Hanh, chiama questa comunità Sangha. Questo evento è quindi il risultato del lavoro di una squadra o di un Sangha. Arrivo, sono un po' emozionata. Vorrei iniziare dalla cornice e ringraziare non solo il magnifico rettore Mario Negri, che ci ha reso disponibili questi spazi straordinari, ma anche tutti gli operatori dei progetti speciali IULM che ci hanno dato supporto tecnico e logistico. Vorrei ringraziarli per le competenze tecniche, ma anche per la gentilezza e la disponibilità sempre. Caterina Angeretti, Roshan Raimondo, Piero Gullo, Paolo Bregolin, Marco Iovine e tutti gli altri. Vorrei anche ringraziare l'agenzia di comunicazione BART e in particolare Laura Franciosi, Rossella Fugaro e Nicolò Caruso, che ci hanno supportato nel vestire graficamente questo evento e nell'organizzazione durante queste 3 giornate di congresso. Ringrazio anche il folto gruppo di giovani colleghi dell'Università Core di Enna che come volontari hanno supportato l'agenzia in questi 3 giorni a stare dietro a tutte le necessità dei relatori e degli uditori. Vorrei ringraziare anche un'altra comunità, un altro Sangha, che è quello di Escum, costruito con convinzione e determinazione prima di tutto da un altro maestro per me fondamentale, Paolo Moderato. Oltre a Paolo Moderato, dal Sangha di Escum vorrei ringraziare Francesco Pozzi, Francesco Dell'Orco, Francesca Pergolizzi, l'amministrazione e tutti i colleghi. In particolare Magdalena Lopez, collega che pur giovane ha lavorato con affidabilità, responsabilità e trasmettendo a me sicurezza e supporto. Sarà un'ottima psicoterapeuta. la vedo. Vorrei ringraziare anche l'altra metà della mela, il Sangha di Act Italia, il consiglio direttivo Massimo Ronchei, Giovanni Zucchi, Francesca Scaglia, Jolanta Burzinska, Nanni Presti, Elisa Rabitti, Silverio Zucchi e Nicola Maffini. Tutti i gruppi di interesse speciale che sono la vitalità applicata alla realtà clinica e territoriale di questa associazione. Il GIS, Act Italia, Act e Salute, Giuseppe Delette, Elisa Rabitti e tutti gli altri, il GIS Act for Kids, Francesca Pergolizzi, Francesco Dell'Orco e molti altri, il GIS Act e Compassion, Jolanta Burzinska, Silverio Zucchi, Giovanni Zucchi e altri, il GIS Act e Sport, Enea Filimberti, Nicola Maffini e il GIS Act nelle organizzazioni con Roberto Bonanomi. Vorrei ringraziare questa associazione e chi ci lavora e i suoi iscritti, quindi grazie anche a loro per il supporto e la partecipazione. Speriamo che presto arrivino nuove energie anche nella direzione, visto che ci saranno le elezioni. Vorrei ringraziare il comitato organizzativo di questo congresso che con curiosità, apertura e impegno si è immaginato un programma, ha messo a disposizione i contatti tessuti in anni di lavoro clinico e scientifico allo scopo di disseminare cultura e curiosità e promuovere un approccio scientifico alla psicoterapia. Paolo Moderato, Nanni Presti, Giovanni Miselli, Massimo Ronchei, Francesca Scaglia, Giovanni Zucchi e Nicola Maffini. Sto per finire. Last but not least, ringrazio tutti i relatori italiani e stranieri che hanno reso questo evento ricco e stimolante e tutti i partecipanti, gli iscritti. Grazie davvero di averci dato fiducia, speriamo sinceramente che sia stata ripagata e, come detto prima, che sia solo l'inizio. E adesso lascio il posto a Lisa Coyne per chiudere, grazie.
Is this on? Hi everyone, it's an honor to be with you here today. And I'm very excited to have the opportunity to talk to you about this topic, which is very, very important to me. I'm not sure, how many of you here work with young people with anxiety or OCD? Mm-hmm. Did you know, on average, at least in the US, it takes 7 years for a young person with OCD to find appropriate care? I want you to think about that. A 7-year-old not getting care until they're 14 years old. That's a childhood lost. And so one of the things that's really, really important to me today is to be of service to you and to share with you a little bit about the work that we do in our clinic, the research that we are beginning, and to give you a model to think about how we might incorporate ACT into work with youngsters with ERP and OCD. I'm going to have a hard time managing these two things. I hope you will be patient with me. Okay. This is a picture of me, and I want to start with a story. I'm going to read you something, and then I'm going to tell you a story. But this is a picture of me last month when I decided to do something I had never, ever done before. In fact, something I never would have thought possible, and until arriving at the destination, did not think possible. I took my 17-year-old daughter, and we trekked from Lukla, Nepal, to Mount Everest Base Camp. 5,500 meters above sea level. It was amazing, and I might point out, you see me standing here looking into a valley that was many thousands of feet deep. I have a fear of heights. Did I mention that? I'm just going to edge up to the... That's actually causing me a lot of anxiety. I'm just letting you know. So, I want to begin with reading you a little something. This is something written by Pema Chodron in a book called When Things Fall Apart. Once there was a young warrior. Her teacher told her that she had to do battle with fear. She didn't want to do that. It seemed too aggressive. It was scary. It seemed unfriendly. But the teacher said she had to do it and gave her the instructions for the battle. The day arrived. The student warrior stood on one side. Fear stood on the other. The warrior was feeling very small, and fear was looking big and wrathful. They both had their weapons. The young warrior roused herself and went towards fear, prostrated herself 3 times, and asked, "May I have permission to go into battle with you?" Fear said, "Thank you for showing me so much respect that you ask permission." Then the young warrior said, "How can I defeat you?" Fear replied, "My weapons are, I talk very fast and I get very close to your face. Then you get completely unnerved and you do whatever I say. If you don't do what I tell you, I have no power. You can listen to me and you can have respect for me. You can even be convinced by me. But if you don't do what I say, I have no power." In that way, the student warrior learned how to defeat fear. So when I was, good story, right? So when I was hiking, and it did not occur to me that I might actually have to face my fear, duh. You know, I found myself on many cliff edges, very, very narrow. Sometimes there were landslides that had fallen and eroded part of the path. There were loose rocks. There were steps. Going down was just as hard as going up. And I thought, I will do exposure. I know how to do this. I treat anxiety. I'm an ACT therapist. I can accept this. And so what I did was I would climb up the path and I would go as fast as I could to get over the steep part until I got to a wider part of the path. And I realized a few things when I did that. I realized it wasn't getting any easier. And the only thing I was seeing as I climbed was this little area around my feet, because I needed to look at this in order to feel safe. And I thought, my goodness, I'm missing the whole experience, A. And B, this is still just as hard as it ever was. And I realized I was white-knuckling, something that I teach my therapists to prevent when they're working with children, something I talk about all the time. We will talk about it today. And I realized I was doing it. I'm supposed to be good at this, and here I was screwing it up. So what I did was, I went from this to this. I looked down, I stopped, I stayed still, and the moment expanded, and in it was fear and also beauty. the enormity of the mountains, the awe I felt. And it was amazing. And so we're going to talk about that today. How do we teach our clients to make that shift from just going through the motions to really, really accepting and acknowledging and showing respect for and bowing to fear? Okay. So for those of you who are behavior analysts, this will be admittedly rudimentary and a review. But for those of you who maybe are new to this, I want to back up and talk a little bit about our previous models of how we thought exposure therapy worked, okay? And how we acquire fear. There are some cues or some stimuli that require no learning. If you are stung by a bee, you experience pain. You experience unconditioned responses, physiological responses. However, sometimes neutral and even positive cues, when they are associated with these very meaningful and salient stimuli, take on those properties when they are repeated together over and over. And this is a really cool thing. I don't mean to geek out, but I'm going to geek out a little bit. Sometimes things take on the psychological property of other things. So this beautiful field takes on some of the psychological properties of this painful stimulus. Just like climbing in the mountains also took on some fear for me. That is really cool. It's amazing that that's how our minds work and that's how our brains work. We call that excitatory learning. I found this picture of Nani. I thought I would share it with you. So the other thing, when we think about OCD, okay, obsessions are recurrent intrusive thoughts. And when we have them, our anxious arousal increases. Okay? Also, as Dennis talked about yesterday in his keynote, our attention, our behavioral repertoire narrows. And the function of all of the very narrow class of behavior is avoidance. So when I was walking, my attention on my feet, just on the 6 inches around where my feet were, was avoidance. Because it was scary to look elsewhere. Okay? Yes. And this is what happens, okay? I think it's really important that when we think about a behavioral repertoire of avoidance, that we really notice also that what narrows is our attentional focus. It becomes like looking through a very small lens. And when that happens, we lose our sensitivity to contingencies in the environment. We lose our sensitivity to context. So what might be beautiful is overtaken by what might be scary. No one has a zombie phobia here, do you? Sorry about that. I had a young client who I worked with, actually still work with, he's doing great, but he thought he was going to become a zombie, and this is one of our exposure stimuli. Okay. So, what happens when we drop something frightening into our context? What happens? Not only does our attention narrow, but we can't be influenced. We don't even notice positive reinforcers. Our repertoire is only avoidance-based. It's very narrow. We have arousal. And we really suppress any other behavior except for avoidance. Over time, when this happens, people experience learned helplessness. So in my clinic, where I work with children and teens who are treatment refractory, I have worked with teens, and a number of them can't leave their house, they can't leave their rooms, they can't eat, because they are engaged in rituals 24/7 to avoid feeling fear, to avoid experiencing obsessions. Okay? Okay. We used to think that exposure worked by erasing this association between our once neutral cue and our response. That we would learn, if we went to this field over and over again, and we didn't get stung, that would somehow break our learning. But you guys already know that that's not the way it works, because you've been here for 3 days, and you've heard this. So this is an operant model, right? This is how OCD works. When people experience OCD or anxiety, they engage in avoidance, which then reinforces that behavior. So when you avoid anxiety and it protects you from it, even briefly, you're more likely to do that again. And that's something that we tell the kids all the time. Your behavior makes sense. Of course you would do that. Why wouldn't you do that? If that's the only tool you think you have, certainly. Exposure and response prevention means having a child face their fear and not engage in the compensatory ritual that neutralizes it. The problem is, there are certain things that this model doesn't explain. It doesn't explain the spontaneous recovery of fear. Somewhere down the road, we often get calls, and the kids will say, my OCD is back, I don't know why. I hadn't feared this. And in fact, I experienced that on the mountain. It was really, really interesting. I had gotten quite comfortable being near edges, and then all of a sudden I was tired one day, and lo and behold, the fear came back. So it doesn't account for the recurrence of fear when you're not expecting an exposure, when it's a surprise, when you're in a different context. And also, people relearn, they reacquire fear quite quickly. It doesn't explain any of these things. So why is that? Okay. So there's some research that has been coming out over the last, I would say, probably 10 years or so. Certainly, we've had exposure around for many, many years that suggests that instead of erasing original learning, what we do is we're teaching new learning. Does this sound familiar? When you think back all over the many talks you have heard this week about RFT, think about Carmen Luciano's talk about how RFT works, how we associate everything. We don't ever unlearn, but we do pretty quickly create new associations. So we develop an inhibitory association with this cue, and we learn actually it doesn't necessarily trigger our anxiety anymore. So how do we actually teach that? What tools are at our disposal for enhancing that kind of learning? How do we make that new learning more powerful than the old learning? Because we know it's much faster. You only need one trial usually to learn to fear something aversive or dangerous. But it takes many trials to learn something neutral or positive, doesn't it? So how do we do that? Okay. So from an ACT perspective, when we do exposure, and we do an ACT-based exposure on our unit, in our clinic, we are looking not so much for habituation in the presence of OCD cues, but what we're looking for is flexible, adaptive, and effective behavior in the presence of OCD cues. Now let's think about that for a minute, because how we talk about it matters. And for you who are clinicians, it's the difference between telling someone, I can help you make your anxiety go away if you do this, versus maybe you'll be scared and maybe you won't. But what we're after is helping you build a life that you love, whether you're scared or not. Okay. All right. So some of the inhibitory learning research talks about different things. There are 8 things that you can do. There's a very lovely paper on this for optimizing exposure and response prevention. And I won't go into them deeply, but a lot of it focuses on sort of discrimination learning, okay? Between really paying attention to what you are feeling physiologically, emotionally, cognitively during an exposure, what you expect to happen, what your mind tells you will happen, all the rules your mind gives you about what will happen should you do this. So, for example, my mind kept telling me, you're going to get too close to that edge and fall and die. Yes, you are. And so what you're doing is you're teaching this discrimination training and this tracking of your experience, okay? So I'm going to skip over some of these. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we might use ACT and how we might use specific elements of ACT to incorporate into our treatment of kids who are experiencing anxiety and OCD. And by the way, this is my daughter, and I mentioned the fear of heights. It's a much greater fear to watch someone you love most leaping off cliffs. So yeah, I put these in here. I was like, Josie, I put your picture in the slides again. She said, I know, Mom. There she goes. Okay. This is me. Even now. No, just kidding. So why would we do ACT? Why would we incorporate ACT? Well, first of all, ACT is about willingness to experience emotions. It doesn't mean that we like them, want them, love them. I do not like feeling anxious. And I'm willing to feel anxious if it means I get to do stuff that matters to me. Okay? There we go. The other thing, and that's also me. Yes, there you go. Absolutely burdened by my thoughts and my mind. It's a very good rendering, don't you think? The other reason to do ACT is because it explicitly addresses the function of our thoughts. It addresses the fact that fear gets right up in your face and talks very fast. And it allows you to step back, respect it, listen to it, ask it permission, even be convinced by it, and not do what it says. Okay. So how might we do this? And we have very specific ways of thinking about this that we are testing on our unit in our clinic. Okay? We incorporate values. So we never, ever ask a child to approach something frightening for the sake of approaching something frightening. Why would you do that? If you could avoid that thing without cost, avoid it. There's nothing wrong with avoidance. What is wrong is when that avoidance makes your life very, very small, such that you can't do the things that you most wish to do. And so when we frame our work with these kids, we don't say, this is the clinic you come to get rid of your fear. We say, this is the clinic where we work to help you get your life back. That's why you're here, okay? So we contextualize the treatment in as many ways as we can. We use this to enhance motivation. We do 2 things to enhance motivation. In addition to using values, we also use creative hopelessness by getting kids to contact the function of their avoidance behaviors, that these actually don't really protect them in the way that they think they do. So not only do we contextualize by adding an appetitive or an augmental, but we pull the rug out from under those avoidance strategies. I was still scared, even though I looked just at the ground around my feet when I was climbing, okay? We also finally use mindfulness very, very specifically, and diffusion in the context of exposure. Okay. And again, the goal is flexibility in the presence of anxiety rather than anxiety reduction. We have a lot of socially anxious kids on our clinic as well, and so sometimes this is how it works with them socially. These are the decision-making dice for their life. No. Do you want to do that? No. Okay. So we work with workability. Yes, there's the big exposure. And we teach them that life isn't about making anxiety go away, but life is about moving outside your comfort zone, moving beyond your comfort zone. Okay. So these are the specific tools that we would use to help strengthen other kinds of learning. Basically what we're doing from an RFBT perspective is we're broadening the frame, okay? So it's anxious and, not anxious. So noticing will help the kids notice the difference between what they expect, what actually happens. We will combine things. So doing values-based exposures means not necessarily even doing exposures, but going out into the world and doing things that you care about, even when those things bring you in contact with the things that you most fear. So you might come into contact with many things that you fear. Combining those things strengthens inhibitory learning. We have sometimes noticed that, if you have a contamination fear, yes, sometimes touching things that are dirty will make you sick. And that's okay. It's not pleasant. But it's okay. We remove safety cues. So my safety cue of looking down, I had to remove. And actually the hardest one was taking pictures. And I really like taking pictures. But not having that visual contact with anything except sky was a little scary. So absolutely removing safety cues. We vary exposure cues. So one of the things that we know from Michelle Krask's research is that in the past we had to use hierarchies, right, of cues, where we worked from the least fearful stimulus to the most fearful. We don't have to do that. So we jump around. We have menus where kids can choose what they want to do. Maybe it's really hard, maybe it's really easy, maybe they jump around multiple times, and that's okay. That's more like life works. Life doesn't happen in a hierarchy. It also undermines some of those hierarchical relationships, those hierarchical frames among these cues. This harder than that harder than that. And it also undermines the logic. First, I have to do this, then I can do that. So it undermines that sort of contingent frame, right? Where first I have to do this exposure, then I can do the really hard exposure, right? So if we take how we think from an RFT perspective and incorporate it into what we do in exposure, that can really strengthen and amplify what we do. We give tips for how to remember. For example, we have a young girl that we are working with who really likes, are you Star Wars fans? Anyone Star Wars fans? I'm a total nerd. Oh God, it's just me. Ugh. Anyway, she really likes the character Rey, who is a very strong woman. And Rey steps up. She's very brave. And so her cue to remember that she had already done some of these very difficult things was do it like Rey would do it. And so we would use cues to do that. And we practice it everywhere, all over. Okay? I want to kind of get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty, though, of how we think about specific ACT processes and how we bring them in to using this kind of approach to bridging this, these two literatures, okay? So one of the things that we have noticed in the kids that come to us is that they may have had multiple trials a very competently delivered exposure and response prevention. And it didn't work. Why didn't it work? And so we're left with this really interesting puzzle, right? And you may know also from the literature that 20 to 40% of young people who are treated with exposure and response prevention don't get better or don't maintain the gains. Why is that? Is it something about the kids, or is it something about how we do this? And so we have been using ACT and RFT to look under the hood of how this might work. There's a difference between climbing up a mountain as fast as you can with a very narrow focus of attention based only on, or with the function only of avoidance, rather than slowly walking and taking in everything as you go, everything you feel in your body, everything you think, everything you see. This is how we incorporate mindfulness into our exposure and response prevention to prevent white knuckling. This is something that we think, and the kids will tell us, helps discrimination learning happen, where kids can really more effectively notice what's different about the exposure they just did instead of what they thought would happen. When we use values, one of the things that we do is before we do any sort of exposure work, we ask the kids, why are you here? What is this about? What is this a step towards? And so immediately what that does is it places this very difficult work under appetitive control rather than aversive control. And what that means is you're working for something rather than something going away. Lastly, one of the things that is most important, and I think that's often glossed over when we think about using these approaches, is the importance of building a secure base for the children that you're working with. It's one thing to have an authority figure make you do something or tell you you must do something. And it's completely another to have someone who you know cares deeply about you, who will not go anywhere, and who will be there no matter if you do the exposure or you don't, and who will help you notice how this is working and how your behavior is working. So our work is very collaborative. One of the things that we do to communicate that to kids is we never ask kids to do things we wouldn't do. We always engage in the exposures with them. Okay. So I'm going to skip some of these. Okay. Okay, I'm going to ask you guys a question. I want you to think about where you spend most of your time. How much time do you spend in the future thinking about what you're going to do next, what you have to do later tomorrow, or what you did or didn't do in the past? How much time, if we take 100%, do you spend right here, right now? Who says I'm here 100% of the time in the present moment? Raise your hands. 100% of the time. Wow, you guys are good. I don't believe you. How about 90%? 80? 70? 60? 50? Yeah, maybe 50, 40. Okay, so think about this, right? You're not struggling with OCD, perhaps. Maybe we are. But our mind is almost never right here and right now. It's always, or lots of time, somewhere else, in the future, in the past. The implications of that are they contribute to an insensitivity to contingencies in the environment. Okay? That's one of the things that we that we focus on when we do exposures. And so what we're looking for is broadening that repertoire, broadening our attention, making flexible attention in the presence of anxiety. And this is Louise Hayes in her younger years. Okay. So here are questions. When we do our exposure planning, here's what we ask. What are you going to resist? What's the specific behavior that you're going to resist? What does this help you with? What we're trying to do is we're trying to get at the function of what's going on. What will you do instead? Okay, because it's not just teaching them not to do this ritual, but it's about giving them something else to do. Okay? We do ask about distress, and I know some people say, oh, distress doesn't matter. How you feel, that's okay. I always ask how you're feeling because I want them to check how they're feeling. I want them to notice it. If I ask what's going on in here, they are not avoiding, they're checking. Okay? And I will ask the most important question is, how willing are you to do this? Because what we're really shaping here is willingness to engage in things that you care about, even if you're feeling anxious. So what we're looking for is variability, most importantly, and pretty high distress and high willingness. Think about the freedom that might give these kids. That's in fact what we see. We use diffusion when OCD thoughts pop up. So you can see from there are great apps that you can use, and the kids actually really enjoy these. Hey, you're contaminated. Okay. Wow, my OCD is really loud today. Okay? And so it changes our relationships with those thoughts. And this is Brian Roche in his younger years, breaking the rules. So one of the things that, the reason that I have so many slides on diffusion and OCD is that sometimes when we are working in the community and we have people who are doing exposure, they're doing things like thought restructuring. In addition to that, which I think actually undermines the power of the technique, because you're reinforcing that thoughts are something that should be treated like literal, real objects that are fearful, okay? So what we want to do is we want to help kids, we want to use diffusion to help kids listen to what fear has to say and not follow the rules. So I know that there's a lot of discussion now in the literature about rule-governed behavior. But what we do know is that if you follow what rules OCD gives you, you have a very, very narrow repertoire. And so diffusion helps us broaden that repertoire. And there she goes. And that's Robin Walser. Sorry. Okay. So our criterion then, instead of did you habituate, is your fear gone, is how effective were you at doing that thing, taking that step towards what most matters to you? That's our criterion for success. And when that happens, that supports the development of a much broader repertoire of behavior. We do ERPs, we do exposure all over. So kids leave our unit, visit mom, go to school, and it really doesn't matter what they're doing as long as they're taking steps towards what matters to them. The last thing to note is that lots of times it's very difficult to convince kids to face their fears. It's really hard, and we all know that. Kids often feel coerced into treatment, and that's actually one of the things that we notice most in the kids that come to us if they've had exposure, they've felt like people have made them do this, and they have never internalized it. They have never self-directed. It's something some adult made them do. So one of the most important behaviors that we shape when we do this is choice. We let them choose. We shape willingness, okay? That gives them, they may not have control over any emotions or thoughts, but they do have control over the choices that they make. And shaping choice is critically important. Okay, so just to sum up with some quick and dirty, maybe not dirty, but pointers, is how you talk about emotion and discomfort is really important when we are working with this, okay? If we're going to bridge these two literatures where we are doing exposure and response prevention from an ACT perspective, we are not interested in anxiety reduction. In fact, I will tell kids, I don't have any interest in making your OCD go away. And in fact, I don't know how to do that. What I am interested in is you building a life that you love. We shape and contextualize approach behaviors, and we shape diffusion and real acceptance instead of white-knuckling or tolerance. Yeah, I'll just go through this motion and do this without really meaning it. And that's very hard to teach. But if we're careful in our use of language, and if we think hard about what sort of frame is this and, not this but, right? We shape willingness. We give plenty of opportunities to choose. And we reinforce that over and over and over and over. And most importantly, we become a secure base where no matter what the exploration is, we will be here. And the function of being a secure base, of course, you know, from the attachment literature, is to facilitate exploration, bold exploration of the environment, trying new things, approaching novelty, suspending your judgments about what will happen, noticing what can happen. And if we think about the goals of working with kids who are so trapped by their anxiety and by their OCD, that is the most important thing. And so I'll just close with this picture. This is our group. We did make it to Everest Base Camp, very fearfully. So we walked with great fear. We did lots and lots of exposures along the way. And you know, what's really interesting is I would do it all again in a heartbeat. And that's the kind of repertoire we want to shape in our kids with anxiety and OCD. So thank you very much for listening.